Good evening. I'm Brett Campbell from Indie News at Noon, and we've got a very special broadcast for you tonight. Major award-winning producer Bob Brockman is in the house, and Diana Barnes lined this up to interview with Bob. We're going to take that together, I suppose. I'll give you a little bit of information if you don't know who the gentleman is. He's mixed or produced everybody from Indie News at Noon, and we've got a very special broadcast for you tonight. Major award-winning producer Bob. All right. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a disturbance. And where were we? Bob has mixed just about everybody from Al Green to the OJs to Bob Dylan to Queen Latifah and CeeLo and you name it. He's been everywhere. He's been on every record you've heard in the last 10 or 15 years probably, and going back farther than that. Who knows how many Grammys, how many nominations, etc. Great stuff. He's got some cool stuff going on. Just launched a how-to mix, seminar session. And we've actually had a friend go through that, says it's wonderful stuff, and all kinds of new things going on we'd like to talk to Bob about. With that introduction, which has been too long, Bob, glad to have you with us. How you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Glad you're here. And Miss Diana Barnes up in New York area is going to take us from here. And Diana, it's a pleasure working with you. I'm going to let you have it.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm very well, Diana.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. So I feel like I know half your family now.
Yeah, right.
Your brother and I know you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's how I came to meet you. My brother took your class recently in the last couple of weeks, and he said it was money well spent. He learned a lot, and he's looking forward to more. And that's what I'm going to lead into. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do, and let's talk about your classes.
Well, I've been a freelance mixer-producer for pretty much my entire adult life. Since I was 19, I've been, either engineering or mixing or producing records. My first major hit was "Ain't Nothing Going On But the Rent" by Gwen Guthrie, which I mixed in 1986, 1987, something like that. And I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of incredibly talented and also very successful major label artists. And I would say in the last 5 years, I've sort of divided my time between artist development, working with a lot of independent artists that aren't signed to major labels, and trying to find innovative ways to market and promote that music, those productions, and also my educational initiative, Elements of Mixing, which I started about 4 years ago, really in response to the obvious dearth of information, really valuable information that's available on the internet about mixing music. I mean, there are a lot of, people who don't understand how to mix trying to teach people who don't understand how to mix how to mix. There's not a lot of expertise at the absolute top level, and what expertise there is in some cases is beyond the finances of somebody. I mean, a 4-year degree at NYU is at least $250,000. Investment.
I know, I got my MBA from you.
Yeah, I mean, which is not to dissuade people from going to, to study a recording career at NYU, but I think teaching mixing is something that's typically outside of the realm of even college courses at major institutions like Berkeley and NYU, which discuss recording and discuss using DAWs and discuss, basically preparing people to know their software and to know their hardware when they go into the work world, whether it's in the post business or television, or they go into making records. But the actual craft of mixing music and producing music is kind of a dark science, and it's been passed down in a mentorship way for the last 70 or 80 years at most of the big recording studios in Nashville and New York and Los Angeles and Paris and London. Pretty much anybody who I can think of who's a famous mixer apprenticed under somebody else who was a famous mixer at some point as an assistant. And so the idea of the Elements of Mixing is to kind of model that real-world experience where everything is real. You know, you're not working on a demo presentation track in a school setting that is just for the purposes of discussing equalization. You're working on a record that I'm just finishing up that's actually being produced at the time that I'm teaching it. So it's much closer. It's much more closely related to the experience you would have if you were working at my studio as an engineer. And I try to I'm trying to always compress the pedagogy to get more and more information into, say, a 5-hour, experience for mixers. When probably the ideal circumstance would be to be here for months or years, but not everybody has that opportunity. So I try to pack as much as I possibly can into one-day sessions.
Yeah, I do hear that it's very informative. Absolutely. If someone wanted to, what do you cover in your class? What is it that you go over? How would somebody reach you on your class? And what is the benefit of coming to you, whereas, like you said earlier, the studios are closing down, and a lot of people don't have access to that kind of information the way you're presenting.
Well, I think that a lot of the craft of mixing comes from face-to-face working together and watching other people do what they do. I mean, for me, growing up early on in my career, assisting for Chris Lord-Alge, who's probably the biggest rock mixer in history, Andy Wallace, who mixed Nirvana, these guys were engineers that I worked for when I was 19, 20 years old, and I learned a lot, even in a couple months working on albums with these guys, because you get all of their tricks and you see what they're doing on the console, and you start to understand how they deal with things like equalization and compression, and like how that clarifies everything that's going on in the mix and gets rid of the fog, and how they add power to a mix, and how a mix actually is a physically powerful experience in addition to being hopefully like a beautiful three-dimensional experience. It's kind of learning that craft, which is as much a craft as film editing or directing or color correcting. It's an evolving craft because it's very fast moving now with all of the developments in digital emulation technology. They're pretty much emulating every analog piece of gear that's ever been built in the last 100 years is now being converted into a plug-in. And some sound good in my estimation and some don't.
Okay. I believe Richard might have had a question. Richard, was that you with the question in regards to the thoughts of the school?
I do have a couple of questions. I first of all, Bob, it's a pleasure to meet you and get the opportunity to talk with you here in this hangout. And I guess one of my first questions is, you were just talking about how a lot of analog gear is being converted over to digital plugins and things along those lines. How do you feel the progression of mixing has gone from analog to digital? How that has affected those pieces of music which are commonly coming out on the market today?
I think that you're able to get into a level of detail in mixing today that would have been impossible in the great era of recording, which would have been the 60s and the 70s, when like a lot of the great sounding consoles and equalizers and compressors were initially built. It was kind of like a sea change in terms of like the sound of records. I mean, it went from sort of like the grungy sound of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in the late 60s to by like 73, 74, like records that were being produced in LA were incredibly slick, because already at that point they had started using new pieces of gear that had never come out. But you still, to a large extent, until fairly recently, say the last 10 years, making records was very much a live enterprise in terms of like making a lot of decisions on the fly. I mean, the earliest records, like the Stax records, Motown records, the whole music track went down in one session. And the guy was just in there dialing in the kick and the snare and the guitars and the bass, and that was it. That was the stereo track, and that's how records were made in those days. And now we've evolved to a place past console automation where you can literally automate every finite detail of every reverb and every delay and every equalizer on, off, adding bits more high frequency in certain sections of a song. I mean, the level of detail in terms of automation and anything that anybody's ever been able to do before, which is why in some cases, pop mixes now sound more sophisticated than anything that's ever been done before because you have those tools, those digital tools. The problem was that digital audio went through a period of about 10 years where all those tools sounded really bad and didn't sound as good as the original analog gear, but now it's professional audio is arriving at a place where, you know, you can make a record on your laptop in Logic that sounds better than any record that anyone made in the 60s or 70s with $1 million worth of gear.
Right. Yeah. I'll agree with you on 99% of that. I have a good friend of mine, Tom Chianti, who's a recording engineer in New York City, and he and I get into a lot of discussions on the loudness wars. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that there was a movement in the mid-2000s, mostly by the major labels, to trump the other labels by making their records louder on the radio. And the only way to really accomplish that was for them to be louder and brighter. And so that led to the kind of anomalies like the Metallica record, which, you know, fans ultimately ended up complaining about because it was so loud and so bright. You know, similar criticisms were leveled at Jack White, you know, on the White Stripes records because they were mastered so loud and so bright. And then, you know, he responded to that by basically making Blunderbuss, which is like this incredibly beautiful record made on an 8-track 2-inch machine with loads of headroom. Nothing was distorted, nothing was peaked, and in fact, when Bob Ludwig, who mastered the record, talked to me about that record, he said part of the reason everyone loved the sound of Blunderbuss is because he didn't do any kind of maximizing at all, even as a mastering engineer. So it has that kind of naturalistic sound to it, which I think the problem is, you know, I think from the perspective of a listener, you know, sometimes attention is dictated by volume, and so I think that's why they make, you know, commercials louder on television than the regular programming is to get your attention.
Right.
And then the FCC outlawed that a year ago, but the same thing happens when you're on any broadcast platform, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're on Spotify or, you know, or whether you're, you know, listening to something on the radio in your car. You know, some things sound louder than others, and I think that they're two different kinds of loudness. There's the actual power of the music, and that just comes from the sound of the track. Like a lot of records that were produced in the 70s, like the Michael Jackson stuff, it's not particularly loud digitally, but it's incredibly loud if you hold up an SPL meter, just because of the way it was EQ'd, and it's very narrow and it's very powerful. And it's that really gets into the essence of what I try to teach, you know, in the course, is that you can make things loud by the way that you saturate them and process them without digitally distorting them, which is a whole other issue. That's just kind of that's sort of like the cheap tack that labels take, and in some cases maybe artists unknowingly take, to just get their music as loud as everybody else, which is to normalize it. But that usually ends up destroying the music and making it really distorted and unlistenable. I think most mastering engineers that I know personally have backed away from that considerably particularly in the last 3 or 4 years. I think that, like, people have devices now like iPads and iPhones that are already sort of programmed to be loud with the right set of headphones. So it's not like you have to turn it up so much, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great points all. I'm going to turn it back over to Diana. I know she has more questions, as well as some from maybe everyone watching the broadcast as well. Diana?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, those are really good questions. I knew Richard would come up with a few, and I know he has many more to come. I know we have a question from the audience, Diane Cobb, who's a good friend to the INN family. She wanted to know, do you work one-on-one in person only to mix people's mixes?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on who the client is. If the client is a band, usually the whole band is in the room with me when I work on the mix. But I mean, there are more and more circumstances. I would say probably about 80% of my mix work I do by myself now, because the files are sent to me through Dropbox, and we do the whole revision process either by streaming my mix to their computer so that they can listen while I'm recording, or sending mixes, via email, via MP3. So, I mean, with a lot of producers and with a lot of individual artists, it's definitely a one-on-one. It's a very intimate experience mixing a record with somebody, because you're really dealing with the deepest aesthetics of what they're trying to accomplish as an artist, and sometimes it's the subtlest detail that ultimately ends up making the record special, something that you might not have thought of.
Oh, cool. Thanks for sharing that. I do believe Aaron Young has a question for you, Bob. Aaron?
Hey, how's it going? Thank y'all for letting me come in. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and Brett was nice enough to give me the invite. My question is, do you have a favorite genre of music to work with? And if so, what might it be?
Definitely, I don't have a favorite genre of music to work with. I mean, I've worked in a pretty wide variety of stuff, from really starting as a jazz trumpet player as a child, and doing a lot of jazz records for Blue Note when I first moved to the city when I was a kid, to quickly sort of segueing into R&B and hip-hop, which consumed a lot of my time in the 90s, to, like indie pop and folk, and, even on some instances country, working with Faith Hill, working with the Dixie Chicks. When you're working with the Dixie Chicks and Sheryl Crow is producing, it doesn't really feel like a country record, it just feels like a pop record, But I think that the main focus of my mixing career is really always to try to work on songs which I felt were significant and that would have a chance of having a broad-based appeal, which most people define as pop mixing. But I mean, I've certainly cut my teeth on a lot of reggae records and a lot of hip-hop records which were very, very independent, and were never considered pop records. And I've sort of continued in that tradition of kind of dividing my time between broadly popular stuff and more niche stuff that's really cool. Usually the coolest stuff isn't as popular as the more mainstream stuff.
Nice. So basically whatever sounds really good to you at the time is, interests you, and you work on that. Yeah,
I mean, I feel like I just kind of adapt to the trends that are inevitably always happening and changing in society. I mean, there's been just a massive explosion of the EDM scene, and interest in EDM from people that aren't even DJs or singers, people that just want to be part of the community. So, I mean, that's something that's certainly occupied more of my time, and even though I mixed a lot of house records back in the 90s, I mean, house music and EDM are really not the same. It's a completely different animal in terms of the way it's produced. It's a product of all of the new sequencers and tools and soft synths that have been available to people in the last 5 years on laptops, which, if you wanted to be an EDM producer 15 years ago, you had to have a room full of analog keyboards. That was the only way to do it. A la somebody like Giorgio Moroder, who did all the Donna Summer records. I mean, he had a whole living room full of keyboards. And that was his palette. He needed to have all those analog keyboards. Now I have the equivalent of all those analog keyboards in my laptop in multiple different configurations,
Well, that's really cool. I appreciate you shedding some light on that. It's really interesting to hear that.
My pleasure.
Okay. Bob, I know I have a question for you. What was the motivation for you? What encouraged you to go from working for other people to teaching and sharing your knowledge? Going the way of entrepreneurship, even though you're freelance, you say.
Well, I think it's kind of that's an inevitable thing in the music business right now, because I mean, so much of the expected valuation of the professional class of the music business, and I'm really talking about everybody from attorneys that have done major label deals, to artist managers, to producers, to engineers, to recording studio owners. I mean, all of these income streams have been almost entirely gutted by the reconstitution of the major label business. Like a lot of these jobs, which were once considered necessary, have now been externalized by the major corporations that produce most music these days. It's just kind of a given that a band is going to deliver a record for free to the label. There's going to be no budget, no support, no artist development. it's a very, very different climate than it's ever been in the history of the music business. There's an expectation that when a record arrives at a label, it's already popular, it's already been marketed, it's already been mixed and mastered, it's done, effectively. So what that means is that if you want to continue to produce music, you have to figure out, you know, some kind of methodology to do it in an affordable way. And certainly a lot of the consumer tools that have come out, you know, consumer DAWs like Ableton and the MacBook Pro and GarageBand and, you know, all of these consumer-facing composition tools have made it a lot easier for people to make records by themselves. But I still think it's very, very important. I think the job of a mixer is a very, very important job, even though mixers might not be making nearly the money that they're making because the industry has shifted so massively. You can still hear the difference when you listen on the radio between a well-mixed record and a record that was mixed DIY by a band or by a band's friend. There's a big difference between a professional mixer and an amateur mixer. So realizing that there was this huge gaping hole in the independent music community, which was like people either having access to professional mixers or people learning how to become professional mixers. The elements of mixing was to try to spread that knowledge in exactly the same way that I learned it, which was sort of peer-to-peer, in a room together working on a session.
Okay. I noticed you also have a phone app. Where did that fit into all of this? And what is your phone app about?
Well, the phone app is just a it's structurally very, very similar to the Facebook page for Elements of Mixing. Actually, the app is driven by Facebook, but it's a fluid mobile app that you can get if you go to the Elements of Mixing website. You just scan the QR code, and the app runs on your phone. And I think I am thinking in terms of having the app be a really simple delivery platform for educational materials, because it's actually the app is already playing videos. So the more educational material I create, the easier it is for people to find it. Because, I mean, for the most part, we live in a mobile world now. People live on their mobile phones a lot more. And people are learning on the go. So, I mean, I think that in terms of student engagement globally, mobile is probably the best platform. If any person in any continent can just scan the QR code and the app will download into their iPhone or their Android phone, then they have instant access, even if they don't have a laptop handy.
Okay, oh, that's good. So what else are you working on? What are you into outside of the Elements of Mixing classes, seminars that you do?
Well, I'm mostly working on the projects that I'm producing and mixing at this point, and I'm sitting next to the artist that I'm working with tonight, this girl Gerhardt.
What's up?
And,
hi, how are you? We saw your arm.
We've been working on this same song for about 6 months, and we're just getting very, very close now to finishing up. So it's exciting, and most of the stuff that I'm producing are independent bands that are financing their own projects, but I'm also publishing them and pursuing opportunities to license their music in film and television. So I'd say, you know, a good bit of my day is still involved in mixing and production stuff, but in terms of the purpose of the mixing and production, it's definitely more towards licensing the music in film and TV and advertising than pursuing a record deal for the music. It's a much more viable business model for music, which is why so many major publishers have shifted their attention towards licensing.
Absolutely. Is that the advice that you would give someone like the young lady that's sitting to your left? Is that the same advice?
Gerhardt? Yeah.
Yeah, bring her on. Hi, introduce her. Hi. How are you? How you doing?
We're definitely.
Hi. I've been listening this whole time. We're taking a break, and then we're gonna go back to it. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Nice to meet you. Say hi, public.
Thank you.
How are you?
Yeah. So.
Was she talking to me?
Oh, yes, she doesn't have her headphones.
Oh, okay.
She can't hear you.
I can hear her.
You kind of hear? Okay.
She was just like blurred for a moment.
And she said, "How are you?"
Yeah. Amazing.
How was it working with Bob?
He's great. He really knows his shit. He has phenomenal ideas, and like sonically, the songs are always on point. Like even like at the like first demo that you ever do, like he just is amazing. Oh,
cool. So what genre of music are you in? Tell us a little about what you're working on.
You want me to?
I know Richard.
Yeah, I don't really know what genre it is. I guess Bob has a better idea.
I think Gerhard is sort of she's kind of in the same territory as Fantagram. It's like very heavy, like epic, kind of dramatic, emotional music with a hip hop undertone to it.
Oh, cool! Can't wait to hear it.
It's
Richard, you jump. Oh, Brett, you ready? I see you jumping at the bits over here. Where are you?
I just got tired of waving at you, Diana, and decided that.
I can't see you. Where are you?
I'm in the lower right-hand corner of your screen.
Sorry, I missed
so we
it.
bypassed about 80 subjects that I had 40 questions apiece on, and I'll just catch up to where we are now for the moment.
Go right ahead.
It's Care, right?
Gerhard is the artist, yeah.
Gerhard. I want to talk to her for a minute.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Brett. I'm down just south of Nashville.
Oh, cool. I've never been, but I've always wanted to go.
Oh, you got to get down here and fight the crowds of musicians that are going to be the next big star. I'm very curious.
Yeah, that's what I hear about it.
Oh yes. Is this your first experience working in quote the pro world? Have you been there for a bit? What do you think about it?
No, this isn't my first time working in the pro world, but this is my first time working with Bob. Well, I mean, we've known each other for like almost a year, but we've been really working together on a track for the past 6 months. So, yeah, no, it's not my first time, but yeah, I was in a bands a lot, and now I'm just kind of like going out on my own, and Bob believed in my songs, so he's been producing them.
Oh, that's fantastic to have somebody believe in your music.
Yeah.
One reason I wanted to speak to you for a moment was because all the independents out here that are really trying to get someplace, and I would love to bounce this question past you and then bounce it over to Bob.
Okay.
And, what are your thoughts as you move along? At what point should you start trying to bring in and attract the attention of a team of paid professionals besides mixing at the house, besides your brother or your girlfriend as your publicist and that kind of thing, and what kind of
at what
initial
point
tip would you
bring
offer?
like PR people and all that?
Yeah, and look for that real manager and the real producer and that kind of thing.
I think your vision needs to be really clear on what you want, and then you kind of like work backwards. I think. I mean, some people, like, there's, like, Gautier out there, and I know, like, James Blake, they all write and produce their own music. So if you can do that, more power to you. But I think most people need a producer. I think even just having, like, a confidant in the studio with you who can say, like, yes, this is it. Like, this is your best performance, or that's a great line, or anything, really. Just to have someone who's, like, by your side, who's, like, in, on your team, and then also to tell you like when something sounds whack. I think once you get with a producer and you really know what you want to do, like my songs aren't even completely recorded yet, and I already have a PR team, I already have photo shoots set up and things like that. But I didn't really like pursue that these people found me, but I think you need to get that in order right away if you want to do something. Like, I already have people who want to shoot a music video for the song that we're doing now, and the song's not even done. So it's really important to have, like, an entire package together before you put something out.
Sounds right to me. And that feedback in the studio, I take it that's maybe helped you avoid what could have been a mistake or two?
Oh, it's so important. It's so important. I mean, Bob will hear, like, if I sound my best, he'll be like, oh, that sounded amazing, and sometimes it's like I'll sing a line and I thought I messed it up, and I'd be like, oh, that's awesome, let's go in that direction, and then it goes into a totally different thing, and it becomes something different. Like, it's so important to have other people in the studio with you who are going to keep it real, and I think that's how you get the best product. Like, some people like to just sit alone, like, oh, I got this, but I don't know, like Bob is, like, invaluable. He is so important, like, having him as a producer of these songs would not be where they are at all.
I'd love to have that experience. And I've got one more for you, and I want to bounce these back by Bob real quick. And
Okay.
this is totally unrelated. I'm not even going to tell you why, but just because I asked, could I get you to say, "Ooh, Brett," for me?
Okay,
Oh,
you
Lord.
want to say, ooh, Brett?
Yeah, with a nice emphasis. So this is to rub in somebody else's face. So.
Okay.
Oh.
Ooh, Brett.
Thank you. Awesome. It's
Oh my
great
God.
to
Nice
talk
talking
with
to
you,
you.
darling. I hope you have a wonderful time working with Bob. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Bob, would you agree when she's right here in the room? Would you agree with the things that she had to say about working with that team and the feedback that you get?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I mean, I know from my own adventures trying to manage artists and trying to push their records out by myself, basically just sort of stumbling my way through, social media and promotion, hiring independent promotion companies, that there's a lot of failure ratio in that, because I think that expertise is something that's really expertise and relationships are really where the value is in the entertainment industry. So I would value, a publicist that's worth their salt, or a radio promo guy that knows 250 jocks over somebody that, that thinks that they know the business and is trying to sell themselves on knowing the business, yet doesn't have that expertise and doesn't have those relationships. I mean, professional expertise is as important to the music business as any other business, and the idea of people just navigating themselves through it, trying to search around on blogs to find ways in which to promote their music, I just don't think that's not the way it's ever been, and I don't think that there's actually been any success with anybody trying to do that way. I mean, any project which is notorious, which you've heard about, you have heard about because professionals have been involved. I would say in almost 99% of the cases. I mean, even in the case of like Macklemore, there was a huge team involved with them. They might not have been signed to a major, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a big team and there wasn't money. There has to be that.
Yeah, people don't know that, exactly. They don't know the backstory.
Well, people don't know that about Lana Del Rey, that she was signed to Jimmy Iovine for a year before they announced that she was signed to the label. And they worked her as an independent artist in like this vague kind of company that was run by two women on a tiny website, as if it was an independent thing, and it wasn't. The whole time, her project had the full support of Interscope and Universal. It's without that kind of push, and without that kind of pressure being brought to bear on people whose responsibility it is to break the music, you don't have that kind of success, because it's not easy. It's not easy to break records at radio. It's not easy to get people to listen to the record. It's not easy to get people to write about the record. That's why pros do what they do, because they're persevering and they don't give up. And it's very rare that artists are able to put that kind of energy into selling themselves when it takes so much energy just to be an artist in the first place. I just think that all kinds of jobs have been placed on the backs of artists because of the new economics of the music business. And that's crazy, because that's not the way artists have made their greatest music. Artists have made their greatest music when they have a production team behind them that's paying close attention to what they're doing at every point in the song, and a promotion team behind them that understands the music and is passionate about it and has the connections to actually push it.
That brings me to a question that a lot of people probably wouldn't want to answer, and you sort of brought it up. Yeah, I've thought this for a while. We're seeing artists, for example, Macklemore, as you mentioned, that pop up out of nowhere with this great, he's an independent story, but if you really dig, you find out, oh yeah, they have been backed by Sony or any number of people for quite a while. Do you think that within the industry, the major part of the industry, there's a faction that are keeping that kind of thing under wraps and trying to pull some things over the public's eyes to make them think that a musician is a brand new, independent, all by himself success. It seems to be that way to me.
Well, I mean, indie cred is just another kind of marketing. I mean, it's today's version of the glossy poster in the record store. I mean, you know, they always used to put sparkles around people's faces and make them look like they're, you know, they reflect like glass. I mean, you know, if you look at some of the record covers and the posters that were made for artists, I mean, they're so airbrushed and ridiculous. You know, it's the same kind of level of sort of marketing hype about an artist that existed in the film business for many, many years. But now what's happening is that, you know, major label record companies are mimicking the social behavior of independent artists as a marketing platform, because if you look at the general taste that run amongst young people 14 to 30 years of age, they tend to listen to what their friends listen to. They don't listen to what major labels tell them to listen to. I mean, there are certainly like a wide swath of the public that if they don't really care about music that much, they just absorb what comes across their plate, whether it's Justin Timberlake or Miley Cyrus or Jay-Z or whatever. There's always going to be mass market music. But within that sphere of mass market music, there is this massive independent scene of, you know, 40 genres of music that people share with each other virally that's actually very successful without having the kind of major level push. The problem with those niche kinds of projects is that they can never scale to the level that an artist can that's on a major like Sony or Universal. If you're going to put a global push out for anything, whether it's a major film or a major record, you need to have all of those media outlets all over the world in order to do that economically in an efficient way. Because these companies are vertically integrated, right? They control all the media portals. You know, they own the movie studio, they own the TV networks, they own the television shows, they own, in many cases, the music publishing for the songs that are being broadcast, they own the radio stations. So they're able to push it out for no fee from affiliated companies within the same major chain, like Time Warner, you know, or Sony BMG. Or in many cases, they own an entire hardware platform like the Walkman, you know, where they can advertise on, you know, with their own hardware. So I still think that for music to go global, it has to have a major company behind it. I don't think that anybody has ever successfully done that independently.
Well,
Good stuff. That let's go to Rich. I believe he's.
I mean, what they're
well,
Richard?
No, I don't think, you know, my comment was that I was agreeing with what Bob was saying, that, you know, these major labels have already done a lot of the legwork. They've laid a lot of the bricks on these roads that all these musicians are traveling, you know, going from point A to point B in their careers. Bob is absolutely correct on that. So, and who was it that had the question? Was it Aaron that had the question, Brett?
yes.
Yes,
Aaron had
okay,
the
thank you.
question.
Let's toss it to Aaron. Thank you, Bob. Aaron?
Hi, Aaron.
Hey, my question might be far-fetched, but I'll give it a shot. Have you ever had the opportunity to work with Eddie Kramer?
No, I met Eddie Kramer in a parking lot at a Grammy Awards once. We were both waiting for our cars, and I never had a chance of working with Eddie. And I mean, you know, the thing about somebody like Eddie Kramer and myself is that we both ostensibly do the same job. You know, we're both engineers that are producers, and you know, I mean, Eddie precedes me by about 15 years. I mean, I actually cut my teeth on all of Eddie Kramer's records. You know. Not just the Jimi Hendrix records, but like many other seminal records that Eddie cut at Electric Lady were, you know, sort of like my template for how I wanted to approach rock music. And you know, Eddie is still making records and is still doing amazing things in his career. But I've never worked with him. I had a brief conversation with him for about 10 minutes one night about 15 years ago.
Cool. He's a pretty awesome guy. There's a band here in Memphis that one of the members blindly reached out to him to work on their music, and he sent them back an email, and he came to Memphis and helped them lay down some tracks in Ardent Studios here. So he's helping them.
Oh, he came down to Ardent to work with this band?
Yeah, he came down. Their band's called American Fiction, and they're all musicians from Memphis. And yeah, he came down here and has helped them produce their EP, which will be out in June. It's pretty crazy. They had a meet and greet event at Ardent, and it was like $75. And unfortunately, I didn't have the cheddar to spend, but I wish I had. And the news did a pretty, they interviewed him here, and they did an interesting segment on Fox News behind the scenes. So it's pretty cool that he came to Memphis and, went to Graceland. He had a good time. So
wow.
But I don't want to steal the show. It's your show, man. So, but anyway, yeah, he seemed like a pretty cool guy. So I figured, from what you just told me, it sounds like, you kind of look up to him and what he's doing.
I'm a huge fan of Eddie Kramer's work. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
I mean, I'd say he and Bob Clearmountain and maybe George Massenburg are the three people that really, maybe Jeff Emery did the Beatles records, probably the 3 or 4 engineers that most influenced me as a child. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you, by the way.
Pleasure talking to you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Aaron.
At the risk of interrupting, Mark Shively, another one of the producers and the editor for Indie News at Noon, has joined us. He's on a mobile.
In his cop uniform.
And his cop uniform. Mark, we're going to get a little bit of noise from your end, and we cannot control your mobile muting, which is done by touching your screen, and the little microphone icon will mute and unmute yourself. If you have a comment, please unmute, or a question, either one. And I do want to say hi to Ron Morris, who's joined us. Ron's actually in engineering school out in California at the moment.
Oh, hey, Ron. How's it going?
He's got a question or two.
All right. Cool.
First, I'd like to start off, I love your glasses.
Oh.
Awesome. I feel like I'm wearing Bermuda shorts to a tuxedo gallery right now. Those are great.
I got these glasses in a gift shop in New Orleans a couple of years ago. They are definitely my favorites.
Absolutely. Oh, with prescription?
No, they're not. They're just fake glasses.
Oh, well, because there's still a reflection in a glare. So, sorry to waste your time on that. No questions right now yet. I want to sit in and enjoy the ride. And,
okay, cool. Right on, man.
Yeah. Oh, and this is Aaron, who's a guitar player, a friend of mine, fellow student.
Hey, Aaron, how's it going?
Good.
Good stuff. I know that Rich has to split right around 9 o'clock. Diana wanted to wrap up around 9 o'clock, and you've just now got some serious audio heads in here, Bob. So
y'all can keep
whatever
going.
time you want to wrap is good for us.
I don't need to wrap at 9. If there's some more questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Oh, absolutely. Go right ahead.
I mean,
especially
if there happen to be any mixers or producers in the room, I'm happy to answer any mixer production questions.
Oh, wow. Where to start?
Yeah, are you kidding me? Brett had 100 questions.
You could ask a really simple one,
Ron, give us another 6 decibels there, if you would.
No 6 dB, stand by.
Mark is looking for his
good.
side job as an opener drummer. If anybody needs a cop drummer guy. Yes.
Thanks for the plug. Sorry.
Yeah. Yes, he's moonlighting.
I think they might
testing 1, 2.
in the new tour of the Village People as well for a guy in a cop uniform. But I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Change it to the YHOA. I like it. Why? Okay, I can't do that. We're not allowed.
No.
My bad.
No singing,
Okay,
Diane.
no.
Please, no singing.
Okay. I'm trying to contain myself. You know, I'm tone deaf.
Yes.
We've got another producer from Nashville who's done some pretty cool stuff, Mr. Steve Andrix, who's been around for quite a while, would like to join us. And
Awesome.
if there's If anybody would like to make a seat for Steve, that would be fantastic. We've hit our limit on seats here.
Yeah, I'm going to be departing along with Rich. I've got to go do some stuff. But hey, it was a real pleasure to meet you, Bob. And
Pleasure to meet you too, Mark. Did you have a question before you sign off?
no questions. But you know, it was really interesting listening. And you know, I hope to chat with you again real soon.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, take care, guys.
Thanks.
Later, Mark.
Richard.
I see Matthew. JS has a question. JS, go right ahead.
Yeah, this is a general question. This is for beginners. Like, I'm not even a beginner, I'm a pre-beginner. What's the best way to get started if you were interested in becoming an engineer or producer? For someone like myself who doesn't have any background, I know a little bit about instruments, I know how things plug in, but what's the best approach to get started to become someone who can actually do something good with their work?
Well, there's a couple tracks. I mean, there's the educational track where you can go to a recording school like Full Sail or University of Miami or Berkeley or NYU or, when I first started going to recording school in the early 80s, in 81, University of Miami was one of 2 programs in the U.S. I think that they're now well over 100, some certified and some shorter-term recording programs. I mean, I think that recording school could be incredibly valuable if you want to get like a sort of a broad spectrum understanding of audio and how gear works and voltage and flow and all of that kind of stuff. If you want to understand the craft of record production, or you want to understand how to be a better engineer or a better mixer, the best thing is to try to figure out a way to work at a facility where somebody's working who you admire. I mean, I had some specific guys when I first came to New York that like I wanted to meet and I wanted to work with, and I tracked these guys down and ultimately ended up assisting for them, in some cases for free. And I think that that is part of the grit, I think, that's required to be successful in the music business, is you need to accept that, whether you're becoming a mixer in a club and you're apprenticing under a front of house guy, or you're working in a recording studio for a senior producer or mixer, who's notorious and who's successful in the business, I think being around that kind of environment, if you can figure out a way to do that, is the best way to learn the craft. It's just by watching other people do it. I mean, I have an educational seminar that I do once a month in New York City here at Mission Sound, and that's really the focus, is to try to show people the craft of mixing.
All right, thank you for your answer.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah,
Glad
Bob.
you've been here with us. I do have a mixing question,
Okay.
and I'm going to take care of some tongue clicking.
Okay, while he's sipping, I will say, to piggyback off of what you said, I do know, I've heard from a couple of people that took your class, that's why I sent my brother to take your class, that the intimacy of the class, they really felt as if they really learned a lot, and that was one of the best formats, because some people have taken some more formal training in some of the schools, and that was the response I got. So sounds like a good format.
Nice.
I would agree, and we've got.
Yeah, I hope it's working. I'm trying to sort of.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Bob. Go right ahead.
No, I was just going to say I've generally gotten that feedback from most people that have come. I mean, sort of trying to mimic the atmosphere that you would have in a normal mix session. For any record that I'd worked on over the course of my career, it's really the same. It's not supposed to feel like a class. It's supposed to feel like a mix session.
I think I want to be there for one of those.
You're welcome to come, especially if you're in New York City.
Maybe I can find a way.
Or maybe I can find a way to bring it to Nashville. I mean, I'm certainly trying to expand what I'm doing beyond the confines of New York City.
I believe we could probably pull that off.
Yeah. Leave it up to Brett. You'll be there in a few days.
Do you have a particular studio you'd like to work in down here?
God, I mean, take your pick. I mean, Nashville has some of the best studios in the world, so Nashville is certainly a heavenly place to do a mix seminar, without a doubt.
I believe you would have a full house for as many months as you wanted to run them.
Well, we'll see.
So,
That sounds very enticing. Being a Southern boy, I like Tennessee because I'm from New Orleans. So I'm always very comfortable in Nashville. I love working down there. I have a lot of friends in that town. So
yeah, I bet you do. I bet you do. So mixing question, and I'm going to dive right into the deep end of things. I think we've done a great job of capturing a really good analog bass guitar sound, and we've worked our butts off to record a perfect kick drum, and our guitars are tuned down to C sharp for this fantastic new rock and roll sound. We've recorded our tracks. We've got our initial playback, and what have we got? I bet you can imagine mud, right? What are we going to do about that mud? How do we cut those bass frequencies around so that the kick drum comes out and bounces with the bass guitar, and the synths aren't buried, or they're not burying the C sharp tuned guitars?
So if I understand your question correctly, like what you're talking about is ways in which certain instruments in the mix get in the way of other instruments, and a lot of that revolves around equalization and the spectrum that's going on. There are, in many cases, components of a part, like vocals or guitars, that aren't absolutely necessary in a mix. I mean, particularly if you're working in a genre of music where, say you want to highlight those guitars that have been tuned down to C sharp, and you want that stuff to rumble, that might require some equalization, some compression on the bass as well as the vocals to make space for that stuff. And I always make the analogy of mixing is sort of like musical chairs. Like you know that whenever the music stops, everybody runs from the chairs, and there's always one person left without the chair. If you create in the mix by affecting other components of the mix, like the vocals, like the bass, then the guitars are perceived as louder without actually having to raise them. And engineers often refer to that as sort of carving out space. And the reason is because if you look at the equalizer, you're actually seeing big dips being taken out of the sound. And what that does is that actually creates another chair. It creates room for that other part to speak. And of course, the other thing that you can't underestimate is the placement of the instruments. I mean, I think my favorite mixing engineers were guys that were mixing records in the 70s and the 60s, like Jeff Emmerich that did the Beatles. It's just like his blends that he came up with were so tight. Like, he'd made all of those decisions. He'd filtered out the kick drum. He'd smashed the snare drum and added a little bit of low end to it. He'd gotten just the right guitar EQ. He'd effectively done the mix on the recording side, because when the Beatles records were being cut, the mixing engineer was really just an intern in the room. He was just a guy to run the tape machine and put the mix down. The real work was done by the recording engineer, which in that case was Jeff Emmerich, who created the sound of the records. He programmed in reverb booms on snare drums, almost an unheard of thing, and then back cut them into dry drums. I mean, he did really some amazing production stuff with just 2 tracks. A massive shift happened in the 80s where the recording engineer just sort of became the guy that was running the tape machine, wasn't really making a massive contribution into the sound of the record in terms of the effects or the EQ. All of that was now relegated over to the mixing engineer, which is the sort of thing that I do for a living, which is the guy who gets the record once the record's recorded, and then you need to create the sound out of those basic tracks, which is what you're talking about, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much, and I think you defined it about the way that I would try to do it, is starting with EQs and compression. And I wanted to get the answer out there because I know I have a lot of friends who fight that problem a lot.
This guy Ron was talking about sidechain compression. So sidechain compression is kind of like using the power of one instrument, like a kick drum or a vocal. They use chain compression in radio, where they just have the music dipped every single time somebody speaks. That's used to an extreme extent in EDM, where almost the entire record is being pushed back by just the bass drum. That's very, very common. That's why you hear the bass drum so clearly, and the music is actually getting pushed back every time the bass drum hits the music, because the entire music track is being sidechained by the bass drum. So you can do the same kinds of things. Let's say that you have thinned your vocals out, and now you've got your guitars really, really loud, and it sounds like a massive record. But then when the chorus happens and the vocals come in, the guitars are too loud. Or maybe the guitars and the synths and the bass are too loud. You know, this is a situation where you can sidechain those instruments just in the chorus off of the vocals. Suddenly, those guys push back, the vocals push up to the front, and you have a much clearer perspective. And that's really what mixing is about. It's about creating a clear picture. You know, the question about is it Photoshop? I would say it's more like Final Cut. Because, you know, the editor can often decide that if it's an emotional moment to zoom in on the picture of the actor so that they can see the actor cry. That's what the mixer does. You're zooming in. By making things louder in the mix, you're telling the listener, this is what's important in the record. If it's a Duane Allman guitar solo and then suddenly, you know, the vocals stop singing and the guitar comes up really, really loud, most people don't notice it. They just perceive that, oh, that's the guitar solo. But these moves are being made by mixers, and they've always been made by mixers. And it's a very similar kind of role to a conductor in an orchestra or an editor in a film. In terms of telling people what to listen for, that's the main job of the mixer. And of course, stylizing the track and giving it a cool drum sound and giving it a, you know, a powerful backbeat, that's the other artistic element of mixing, is actually taking something which maybe is a mediocre sounding track and turning it into something which is extraordinary sounding, that's powerful.
How much of that extraordinary sound do you think is being done these days by the engineers and producers? For example, it's not the sound that came out of the amplifiers and off the drum heads is not the sound that we're hearing when it's finished. And how much do you think the engineers and producers are adding the icing to the cake these days, so to speak?
I think engineers and producers have added the 35 years. I think it's being done differently now in terms of most music being done digitally in a DAW in a workstation with plugins, but the same expertise applies because only a producer can have the sensitivity to understand when to raise Adele's voice when she's being gravelly to let people know that they need to emotionally connect to her. I mean, this is subliminal stuff. It's a dark science that really only mixers and producers understand. And it's a language that's very difficult to speak about outside of the audio community. So I feel like, you know, as a person who's been closeted inside the audio community for, 28 years, I would like to be able to try to, in some way, explain to people who are not part of the audio community what mixers do and why a mix is important, why it makes that song more emotional or more listenable to the person. And I would say that it's even more important with a producer, because the producer is really like the gem collector. He's the guy who's sitting there the whole time while the record's being made, listening and waiting for those little magical vocal moments to happen and grabbing them and then amplifying them for the benefit of the listener. That's why a producer's job, I think, is incredibly important and incredibly valuable to artists. Artists who do not have the benefit of a producer really caring and really being there and being present while the music is being created are losing out on a really, really important part of the history of hit records.
I got to agree on that. I mean, even just trying to mix a simple, singer-songwriter song yourself, you're so attached to it that every moment of it is important. And I know I've made some really ugly mixes because of that very same thing. I'd much rather hand it off to someone else and say, "Here, you mix it."
Well, it's a very precise kind of job. I mean, most producers are not good mixers, and certainly most artists are not good mixers. But not many mixers are really great artists or great musicians. I mean, it's a completely different discipline. It's a discipline that deals exclusively with sound and power and how that voltage is propagated through speakers. It's a very, very deep science. It has a lot of physics in it. It has a lot of math. It has a lot of artistry. It has a lot of creativity. It's a very, very deep craft, and it's unfortunate that with the downsizing of the music business, the opportunities to actually work in a big studio and watch masters at work, has now been relegated to, a festival that happens once a month in France with, famous mixers coming to sit down with a classroom full of people and do their job for 5 days. I mean, this is an experience that most, assistants had for years working at places like the Hit Factory, the Power Station, Ocean Way, Record Plan in L.A., Record Plan in Sausalito. I mean, these are famous studios where just about everybody that you've ever heard of that has made a famous record came out of.
Yep.
That's how it happened. It's very, very difficult to teach mixing from a book, and it's even more difficult to teach mixing from within of being in a university system where you decide that this is what we're going to talk about on each day. Because honestly, I've mixed over 2,000 songs in my career, and every day is a massive struggle for me to figure out the right thing to do. Because it's so complex, and because every song is different, and because you keep setting the bar higher as you get better at your job, every day is a challenge. I wouldn't say that there's any circumstance where a mix is easy. I think some productions are better executed, and so it makes it easier to do the mix. But in terms of the quality of mixing that people are delivering today, I mean, records are being better mixed today than they've ever been before because of the level of detail that we can go into now in the digital world. These tools were not available to anybody until fairly recently.
I still like the old Beatles records and the old Pink Floyd records, and when I say records, I mean, hard acetate vinyl. So I almost disagree on that one, Bob.
Well, I think that what I appreciate about the Beatles records is the artistry of how these records were actually put together live. But in terms of sophistication, the mixes are not particularly sophisticated. I mean, in most cases, Jeff Emmerich's tools were like an equalizer and a compressor and one reverb at Abbey Road, and no automation, no ability to control any of his moves. I mean, I think if you ask Jeff Emmerich, does he have more capability now as a mixer or in the 60s when he was working with the Beatles, it would be an obvious answer. He has 1,000 more tools at his disposal now than he did at that time. The Beatles records are amazing. I think partially because of the gear that they were recorded through, partially because of the actual guys, because of the content they were creating, and partially because that technology was being written at the time. They had scientists in the back of Abbey Road that were building like new high-frequency EQs and new compressors. I mean, the Fairchild came online in '67, right in the middle of the Beatles' career, and it changed the sound of their records profoundly. Once Phil Spector started using the Fairchild and smashing all of the reverb and smashing all of the drums through this massive mono-tube compressor, it changed the sound of music. I mean, the wall of sound from Phil is as much a result of the Fairchild compressor as anything else that he was doing. Yeah. It's a combination of the distortion that was coming out of the kind of transformer and tube consoles that Phil was using, the EMI console with the toggles going through tubes, going across another massive tube compressor. It's difficult for people today to even mimic that sound. Because even the pathway that the Beatles went through, where these records were made, they were compressed again, then they went to a mastering studio, and the mastering studio was using all analog gear, putting it into, a needle and burning it into wax. I mean, that doesn't happen very much anymore. The whole transfer process, even the mastering process has changed to a much more digital transfer because we live in a digital world. Mm-hmm. Most mastering guys don't cut the records that they master to vinyl now. So they won't have the same sound as a Beatles record that was recorded in '65. Nope. Those amplifiers, to some extent, I mean, they exist because people trade this stuff on the open market, but these are pieces and components of an entire system that was built at that time to do nothing but amplify music. Now we live in a completely different postmodern world. I would say that the mixes of today are far more sophisticated than the Beatles mixes. Whether they're more powerful or whether they're better musically, I think it's very difficult to compete with the Beatles. That's why people keep going back and listening to the Beatles records, because it's a moment in time that is a magnificent thing to listen to from an audio perspective. Particularly if you can get a hold of the masters, so you can listen to the original tracks, the original 2 mixes that Jeff Emmerich did. It's just amazing what he did with a 2-track and a 4-track machine in the early records. I mean, they just sound amazing, even the earliest records that they did.
Even he was amazed. I read an interview with him recently published in Tape Op, and he says that he's still just amazed when he listens back at the things
how
they were
incredible
able
is
to
that?
do. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think he was lucky to have his hands on some of the most amazing recording gear in the history of recording. I mean, very few studios can mimic that little room that he was in the pit at Abbey Road. It was just a magical time, and they were, you know, I mean, I've seen from the George Harrison movie that they were always experimenting with new boxes that they were bringing out. A phaser box that John Lennon would use, you know, putting the guitar through a Leslie. Nobody had ever done that before the Beatles. And then suddenly the Pink Floyd guys, because they were down the hall, they found out about that, and they were like, well, fuck it, we're going to put our shit through a Leslie too, you know. And then John's going over and stealing ideas from Pink Floyd because they're doing different things with delays and reverb. And then, of course, George's relationship with Phil Spector, and Phil was all about slap and reverb and distorting the fuck out of the music, you know. And still, records that Phil did with George Harrison, it's fatter and louder than anything I've ever heard. Maybe Led Zeppelin is at the same level in terms of absolute audio power. And that's a very different thing from digital level. Mm-hmm. These records can sound louder and more powerful on the radio and be 10 dB quieter than an EDM record. And why is that? It has to do with voltage. It has to do with how that music was tricked by the gear that it went through, which was mostly tubes and transformers. Mm-hmm. It's how audio gets distorted, and distortion is the biggest secret of pop music from the last 60 or 70 years. It was a component of all music in the 20s and 30s and 40s because they didn't have sophisticated enough circuitry to have low distortion music. So all the 78s of the jazz records are completely distorted, and yet they're beautifully listenable records. Yeah. But a lot of early hip-hop records from the early 80s were distorted because they were clipping, you know, most of these records were being looped by DJs, guys like Hank Shockley that was at my seminar last week, you know. I mean, they literally made these records, there were no samplers at the time. They were actually spinning the beat bar by bar by bar, just like they were at a club. That's how they made the beats, is going back from turntable A to turntable B. You know, looping had been going on for a long time before the samplers came out in the mid-'80s.
Different kind of loop.
And that's how it's an analog loop because like not every beat gets dropped in at exactly the same place. It's not on exactly the same place on a grid. Hip hop records were not made on a grid back then. They were made on multi-track machines, and they were basically spun in off turntables. That's how all the beats were made. And all the cutting and all the horn parts and everything that was cut in by DJs. That's how hip hop started, and very few people even understand that.
That's amazing stuff. Anybody that can make an analog loop come out has definitely got my respect for sure.
Well, it's an incredible gift to actually just be able to run a loop in perfect time, going back between an A turntable and a B turntable, or in Africa Islam's case or Grandmaster Flash's case, 3 turntables. They would be working the same record on 3 turntables, and Grandmaster Flash could run a drum beat and go back and forth between a drum beat and also be stabbing in like horns off a 3rd turntable while the shit was running. I mean, and to know how to backslash, how to back cue that fast and always drop it back in at the same tempo it's an incredibly high skill, and there are very few young DJs that have the ability to do that. Very few.
Extremely.
I mean,
few.
The thing is, now that everything is done, with automated DJ machines, you could just set the other record to loop to the first record without actually even knowing where it is. It's automated now, the whole DJ process. It's very, very different. Very, very different than DJs used to be in the 80s. That's for sure.
Yeah, sure is.
And even now, it's definitely an admirable skill if someone can pull it off. Not one that I have. It's beyond me, I think.
It takes a lifetime to be a great DJ. There's no question. It's a really, really deep skill. And it's a different skill than an EDM DJ. Very, very different skill. Because, this week, this tribute to Larry Levan, who's actually the DJ that I worked with on the Gwen Guthrie record, Ain't Nothing Going On With the Rent. That was my first 6 months I moved to New York. I was working with Larry Levan, who was playing every Friday and Saturday night at Paradise Garage, and he would play 8 or 9 hour sets. And Larry would do this stuff where he would like drop it all the way down to like where there was no low end left of the music and turn the speakers all the way down, and everybody in Paradise Garage would lay down on the floor. And he would run the beats really, really quiet. And he worked the people on the dance floor, works people on a stage. It was an incredible thing to see. And I mean, that just wouldn't fly at an EDM event. You know, the music is always pulsing, it's always going, there's very little nuance to it. The music is being blasted, and it's blasted from song to song to song, but that's not the way a lot of really classic DJs worked their sets at clubs. You know, sets that last for hours. Most EDM sets don't last for hours. The guy comes on, another guy comes on, another guy comes on after that. To hang out at Paradise Garage from like 9 p.m. until 10 o'clock the next morning and hear this guy spin for 10 hours straight is an amazing thing.
I can only imagine. And it's you know, I get to see quite a bit of the EDM stuff. I'm not a huge fan, but I get to see a lot of it. I forced myself to stay through most of a Skrillex set at a recent Bonnaroo.
Yeah.
And I won't be forcing myself to sit through a Skrillex set this year.
Well,
just not my thing. Great respect.
It's a different kind of energy. It's a totally different kind of energy. I mean, I really think that, you know, every kind of music that every producer and artist is doing is viable in their own way, but they fulfill different things. You know, there's always been music that's great as party music. There's always been music that's been deep and spiritual. There's always been music that's been intensely emotional. And there's always been music that makes people want to bump and grind on the dance floor. And, you know, they called it race music in the 50s because they were scared of it. They were scared that, like, all of these girls wanted to fuck, you know, because they were listening to Elvis. This is the effect that music has on people. It affects people at every level of their experience, intellectually, emotionally, physically. You know, and
they had good reason to be scared.
They did, because actually it was music in the 50s that began to shake society up, and it will take a different form today. And you know, there are many other kinds of music that are influencing people's thinking besides EDM. You know, EDM happens to be popular in a very, very broad-based way because I think globally most people are looking to have big communal experiences. That's why people go to the movie theater. That's why people go to EDM events, because they want to be with other people. I think that that's a human need. And so far, EDM has been filling that niche. But I mean, a lot of people are talking about these guys in Vegas making $250,000 a night, and that might be a bubble. And even the DJs are admitting that they might not be making that money next year, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. I mean, when I started in the business, you know, producers were getting 10 grand a side to make a record. By the time I was in the middle of my career in the 90s, producers were getting $150,000 a record. In some cases, $250,000 a record for a beat. You had an industry that was pushing out $13 billion worth of product a year with a CD format that kept everything afloat. But with the disappearance of the CD, it changed the economics. The economics of DJing in places like Vegas are that, you know, that particular club is probably pulling in $5 million a night between bottle service and club charges. So they can pay the DJ $250,000. If those numbers change, then the earning power of those DJs will go down. I know that DJs in my day, when I was going to Paradise Garage and Danceteria, MK, the early, you know, area, all of the early club years where Keith Haring and Andy Warhol and all of these people were making the scene.
Wow.
It was not, you know, it was not uncommon for a DJ to make $500 or $1,000 a night, and I remember at that time thinking that these guys were rich, that was a lot of money. But I mean, that's nothing compared to the kind of money that Afrojack or Avicii or any of these guys are making at big festivals. It's economies of scale. You know, EDM has scaled outward. Independent music doesn't have the capability to do that. That's why a lot of people are gravitating towards EDM on the economic side, because it has scaled, because there's a lot of money in it. Everybody wants to be in a part of the music business where there's money. You know, that used to be pop artists making CDs. Now it's DJs playing other people's records. That's the experience that people are getting.
Sorry, I'm still a fan of the individual artist.
Yeah, So who are your some of your favorite individual artists?
Probably people that nobody knows. I've flat fallen in love with the music created by a gentleman I met here on G+, a guy named Tim Behrens. His music is just, it's beautiful. It's so soulful. Fantastic stuff. And but bigger names too, Tommy Emmanuel, so brilliant in his guitar playing, and the stuff I like really does pretty much span the whole gamut, because I'll listen to almost anything, and yes, I will listen to some EDM music. But most of the people that I'm listening to right now are people that I've come across on the net in the last couple of years. Independent artists that really don't have they don't have the chance to make it big, other than what they can do through Facebook or Google Plus or whatnot to meet new people. I'm just having a blast listening to their music. A lot of it's absolutely great.
Well, I think a lot of this stuff about mass appeal for artists doesn't have a lot to do with the ability of the artist to market themselves. I think it's more certain musicians' music just tends to gravitate globally. I mean, whether you're talking about Bruno Mars or Michael Jackson or Bruce Springsteen or Elton John, it's just certain artists write songs that work across the board for a lot of music listeners. And I don't think that they set out to do that. I think that they do the music that they know how to do, and some music is mass market and some music is extremely niche. And I don't think that any of the artists that you mentioned are lesser artists than artists that are more famous. It's just it's just like there are niche movies that are focused on a very narrow scope as documentaries that might have 10,000 people see them, and they're mass market movies that will see them. It's just the difference between mass market media and niche media. I mean, the great thing is that there are monetization schemes for independent artists, like Stage It or Patreon, or any of the new kind of tech companies that are supporting artists, where they can actually make money with an audience of 25 people or 50 or 100 or 1,000.
Isn't that neat?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I mean, this stuff didn't exist 5 years ago. None of this stuff. And it's just growing. I mean, the idea of people being able to build a tribe around an artist, whether it's 100 people or 1,000, is going to grow. And the ability of people to be able to find their fans, who their niche fans are, through the web, is going to become more sophisticated over time as people get better at tagging things and filtering things and figuring out, how to find the music that you like without using the traditional media channels. Meaning iTunes, Spotify, major labels. Just finding it through the web, finding it through search. That's going to happen more and more.
Absolutely, and I think it's just a great thing overall. I know I've been tickled to death with the things I'm seeing happening due to all these great sites and interfaces that we can use. I know that most people in this room, or in this hangout room, that is, agree that we wouldn't even know each other if it hadn't been for meeting on Twitter or Google Plus, and we've played music together, and we've listened to other people's stuff together, and we've had just a blast with it. Do want to say hi real quick to Steve Andrix, who finally, I think this is the first time I've ever seen him in a Google Hangout, so good job. Congratulations on figuring it out. And you're coming in toward the end, Steve. I do want to give you a chance. Jump in if you've got a couple questions, and I'm pretty much going to turn things back over to Diana, though before we do split, Diana, I've got one more question I want to ask. We can do it on air or off. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay, can we get Aaron's question in real quick? Aaron, you want to get your question in before Brett does?
Sure. Since you're so inundated with music every day, and that's what you do, for a living, you ever get to the point where you just have to put it away for a minute and go and do something else? And if you do, what are some things you do to kind of get away and come back and look at things in a fresh way?
Well, I think it's really easy to get lost on a record if you're working on it for a long period of time. Like this Carahart record, she and I have been working on this record for almost 7 months now, which is kind of hard to imagine if people don't really understand the development and the production process, how it could take 7 months to do one song. But, you know, I think Trevor Horn spent over a year on Crazy with Seal. I mean, nobody knows that, but I mean, there were just a lot of blind alleys that you go down that you realize aren't the right direction. And so there's just a lot of stuff that you do that has to get scrapped. And so I think for me, perspective-wise, I like to kind of jump around between different projects that I'm working on, and I like to get away from the studio. You know, I mean, this is not something that I did early on in my career. I was just grinding 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and I was so glad to be in the studio. It didn't occur to me to go out and take a walk, you know. But you know, I guess as you mature as a creator, you start to realize when you're losing your perspective, like when your brain is starting to shut down, when your ears are starting to shut down. And I think, you know, like even taking a 5-minute break or taking a 10-minute break and just going outside or going to get a cup of coffee. I mean, I almost as much go out to get a cup of coffee just to go out as to get a cup of coffee, you know, because whenever I come back to the studio, I think this applies to any kind of content creation. I have a different perspective than I had when I left the room 10 minutes. I mean, if you take a whole day off, or if you take a whole week off from a song, you can come back and you can have a completely different view of it. You kind of are, maybe your brain has been processing all that information for the last week, and you come back and you listen to it, and like the answers that were so daunting for you are almost obvious when you've actually had a break to actually get away from the production or the mix or whatever the thing is that you're working on. I think taking a break is super important. I've tried to incorporate that more and more into my work, almost mandatorily taking myself out of the room, you know, a couple times a day.
Cool. Thanks.
My pleasure.
I'm blown away, and this is amazing. I'm going to get going. I got to get back to work. I had to put everything aside to stop by here, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Great input.
Thanks for stopping by.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really glad you brought up the production and producers. That was Rick Rubin is. If it wasn't for the Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic, I never would have gone in the musical direction that I went. And that was what explained to me in audio terms and sonically about the emotion that you were talking about emoting. So wonderful, wonderful to hear you.
Well, speaking of Rick Rubin, don't forget about Andrew Sheps, you know.
Right.
Because he's responsible for all those records. You know, the recording engineer and the mixing engineer is sort of an invisible person. And if I could do anything in my educational forays, it's to get the mix engineer out of the closet. I think I heard an interesting statistic a couple weeks ago, which was that Chris Lord-Alge, who has mixed some of the greatest records in history and has made some exceptional records even in the last couple of years with Daughtry and some other bands, is by far probably the most famous rock mixer in the audio community, and everybody knows. I mean, they've even named plugins after him in Waves. But as far as like him being publicly visible, I think almost nobody knows who Chris Lord-Alge is. So, you know, Chris appeared on the screen. He appeared on, I think it was maybe a month ago, he appeared on Pensado's show, and the next night Chris was in Santa Monica and he went to a restaurant. Somebody said, "Hey, you're the guy from the Pensado show," you know. And I think based on that experience, I think Chris has decided that, you know, he wants to spend more time with Dave because he wants to be more public. You know, he doesn't want to be an unknown person because he really is an extraordinary guy at what he does. But the idea of mixers are being really known only within, you know, film directors are not known just within the film community. Everybody knows who film directors are. And most people know who Rick Rubin is because you can look on a record and the front cover says Adele produced by Rick Rubin, but it doesn't say recorded and mixed by Andrew Sheps, at least not on the record, and in many cases not on IMDb.
Right.
So,
so true.
Yeah.
So it's an important thing for people to understand. Mixers do.
Butch Vig, I love Butch Vig stuff too. Huge fan of the sound gig down in LA before they sold the console to Grohl.
Dave Grohl. Well, he did a great job just on the last Foo Fighters record. He did an amazing job on that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That was, and the one boasting thing was he took it all back to analog.
He did.
Just so he can sell them all as downloads.
Yeah, I hear that Dave Grohl is doing a show on HBO about recording studios. It's going to be very interesting because it's going to be much more mass market than Pensado's show. And he's visiting recording studios. And what are recording studios full of? Recording engineers. You know.
Absolutely, about time.
Yeah, I saw the article, and he's going to be recording in 8 different studios, and the album that should be out in the fall.
That's correct.
Oh, cool.
So I'm a
So
big.
you can probably hear the characteristics of the rooms.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that you're going to record one song in one studio, and then go to another studio and do a whole other thing and have a whole other idea. That's pretty. I don't know. It's cutting edge. People, it's something different to do, for a record. And who else but Dave Grohl to be so innovative? I mean, he is just an awesome musician, ambassador of rock and roll. I mean, a legend, and really respect him. I love his music. He's an awesome drummer, as we all know.
Plays drums.
He's a pretty good filmmaker too.
And and so it's going to be interesting to see that series. I bet they get a lot of ratings on that for HBO. So I'll be down.
I wish him the best of luck with the show. I mean, I think Elvis Costello has done some great things in terms of just bringing out people's artistry in a very, very personal way. With his TV show that he's done. It's been done really, really well with singers, and it's been done really, really well with artists on a lot of different platforms. But in terms of really exposing the process of what goes on in the recording and production of music, there's very, very little out there that's actually talked about that.
I love the shows that you can find, particularly the old VH1 shows that get into the making of the records, and I still watch some of them over and again. Fantastic information in them. There's been a lot of fantastic information tonight. And of course, I can talk forever on it. Steve, do you have anything you want to throw in there? I see you're typing, but with just the profile picture up, I'm guessing maybe you don't have a microphone ready. I'm going to take that as not being microphone ready.
Okay.
And
I have to get running. Excuse me. Thank you, everybody. Brett, Jan, Steve, Aaron, Bassy Bob. Bassy Bob or Bassy Bob? Sorry.
Bassy Bob. Yeah, Ron, you can find me on Facebook. It's just Facebook.com/Bassy Bob. So please add me as a friend and stay in touch.
I'm talking to you tomorrow. Right now I'm too tired. No, just kidding.
Awesome. Yeah, please send me some music, man. I'd love to hear what you're working on.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm having a wonderful time doing what I'm doing and starting my life. It's that second half first. So we'll see how it goes.
Right on, man. Okay, cool. We'll have a good session.
Great to see you all. Thank you. You guys too.
See you soon, Ron.
so my last question, Bob, and we can take this almost as an engineering question. You can take the answer wherever you want to. I'd be wearing the ones that you're wearing, but I've rewired the left channel I don't know how many times. Would you suggest a regular microphone cable as a headphone cable so I can have some decent copper to work with?
I would suggest just another pair of Sonys. They're $99. I mean, the thing about the Sonys is they sound great when they're new, but they get beat after about a year, and I just replace them because they just start to distort and they don't sound good anymore. But I mean, I think that the Sony 9502 is the best studio. For me, they're the best studio headphones I've found. You know, far superior to almost anything else I've heard. And they're a bit hyped in the high frequencies, but it kind of helps. You know, when you're trying to work in detail.
It sure does, especially when you've been running saws for 20 years.
Yeah, right.
I've had to fall back lately to the old ones.
Yeah, yeah.
They still
I
work.
had a pair of those back in the day as well.
All right, but all right, and so for the fellow that's not going to go invest $100 in the next few weeks, reckon a microphone cable would do well enough?
To fix the headphones?
Yeah. Am I going to lose too much definition or anything like that?
By putting a mic cable on the headphones?
Yeah.
No, I mean a cable's a cable. You know, I mean it's just as long as you've got the right connection. You know,
No
as long as
problem
you've got
there.
a solid connection. I know like a lot of techs in the old days they used to change the plugs on the headphones to either like XLR plugs or whatever the headphone boxes used, even if it didn't originally come with that. That's pretty commonplace for people to change the cables on headphones if they've got the electrical know-how to do it.
Cool thing. Cool. Yeah, I've resoldered the wire that's in there enough times now that it just doesn't make a good connection. I'm tired of working with, you know how those new wires are. They're weird to solder. That's pretty much. I'm okay. Well, I've got a million more questions, but we've been here almost 2 hours, so I'm gonna shut up, which is sometimes the smartest thing for me to do, and I'll let Diana wrap it up and take us out. Thank you, Bob, very
Thank you so
much.
much,
I've
Brett.
had a blast.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, this has been one of our better hangouts. Thank you so much. I was like, we got to talk to this guy. My brother wouldn't shut up about him. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I hope to sit in one day. I have zero technical knowledge, so I will get nothing from your class except for the joy of being there with you.
Well, you'd be surprised. You might actually get some. Well, you know, like not everything that I discuss in the class is technical. Like some of the things that I discuss in the class are just aesthetic things, like where should a vocal sit in a record, and I mean that's something that anybody can understand.
Oh, yeah,
you know, you can hear when the
absolutely.
vocal is quite speaking in the record. You can hear when the vocal's like nice and out front and well EQ'd. Anybody can hear that. You know, any listener can have an aesthetic idea of how they think music should sound, and you certainly don't have to be. You don't have to be a super sophisticated mixer to come to the class. I think you could probably get something out of it, even if you're just beginning. You know, there's something for everyone, hopefully.
Well, I will definitely be recommending you. I think it's a must for anyone interested in that, for the personal aspect that you share. And I thank you so much for giving us your time. This is great. Yeah, I'm going to have to come through and sit with you one day. Looking forward to hooking up with you, passing by you in New York. There's great streets in Brooklyn, in the city. Go to a lot of festivals. So
nice.
Yeah, love it here.
Absolutely. Well, definitely.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
If I can comment quick,
Great talking.
I want to say thank you to everybody, especially Basie. Is it Basie Bob? Is that how you go by? Basie Bob?
Yeah, Basie Bob.
Right.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Diana. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm like, wow. You know, how do I say anything else but wow? So
at least you can go back and check it out. Absolutely.
I'm a simple person, and I'm a fan of people who are indie music, and I'm a fan of people who are industrial music, and I try to figure out how it works. And a hangout like this allows me to differentiate, like what's junk, what works, and what might work, and what might not work, and probably not work. So for me, I enjoyed the hangout. Basie Bob, thank you very much.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Brett is
absolutely.
My pleasure.
I appreciate him inviting me. Aaron and June, thank you guys. So with no further ado, I just want to say thank you.
You're so welcome. Basie, I'm sorry. How rude of us. Me and Brett were so rude. Janae Giddens, you see her popped in and out. She's also another INN team member, so you got to meet a bunch of us tonight. So, yeah, she's another one. Her and Brett do the weekly news, and they're hilarious. They really are. Yes, they really are. So we all, bring ourselves. Thank you so much. I hope people understand how priceless this really is, and that's what we try to do here at INN, bring you people, not just musicians, but great people like yourself that are helping these musicians. And I think it's important. So please, everybody, make sure you go back, pass it on, share it, and any opportunity, we would love to talk to your artist once she's out and about and she's ready to drop, and can't wait to see that. That should be fun. She seems like a great girl. So thank you, Bob. That's all I can say is thank you so much. And I'm glad my brother took the time to come and check you out and share with us.
Thank you. See y'all later.
See you.
All right, guys.
See you, Brett.
Okay, Brett, you can close it down.
It all up, buddy. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks, Diana. You're a fantastic member of this team. Glad to have you here. Bob Brockman, you're awesome. Carrie Hart, it was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think you're going to have a fantastic time working on this record. Bob, I got one more quick favor. And I'd almost forgotten, because I got Carrie Hart to say it. The rest of the people, they wanted to hear you go, "Ooh, Brett," and trust me, this would be good. It'll come
you
out on
wanted
Twitter.
to hear that, Brett.
There's a reason behind this.
But I do want to hear it again.
You want me to say it?
Yeah, I know it sounds weird, but there's a reason.
Ooh, Brett.
It's a point. Make
Awesome. There you go, Billy Kay.
So cool. Oh, that's Billy Kay? He finally found us? We love
No,
Billy
he
Kay.
didn't finally found us, but that's what that's about. He's got so many recordings from the Twitter Tuesday live crowd with Butterflies Radio, and that's Mark Lamdansky and Carol Reardon. You met Mark earlier, and they always get people to say, "Ooh, Billy." So thank you very much for letting me have one to rub back at him. You guys, you've been watching Indie News at Noon special interviews with Bob Brockman.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. We'll be here in the Hangout for a few minutes after we're off air.
Great. Thanks, guys.